Hi everyone, welcome to Vision to Reality. My name is Karen Conrad and I'm so excited because today we're starting a brand new series based on my new book called The Promise of Purpose. I'm going to be sharing things with you in this series that literally changed my life. I'll be right back. Thank you for joining me today. I'm just so excited about what we're going to talk about today because it's really a foundation of something that literally changed my life. Now, I'm going to challenge you a little bit with some things. We're going to talk about 4 questions that I think everybody has asked the Lord at some point or another in their life. And then we're going to go through the life of Hagar and talk about a really interesting situation she found herself in that the Lord met her. And as we go through this, I really believe that you and I are going to find ourselves in a position that really ministers to us with the similarities, you might say, or we might be going through things that we didn't realize were actually similar, but it's going to be a big source of encouragement for you. And I believe it's going to answer some questions that you have had over the years, over your lifetime in your heart. So are you ready for those 4 questions? I'm going to tell you what the questions are, but I'm not going to give you the answers yet because we're going to see it through the life of Hagar. Okay, here's the questions. You might want to write this down. Why am I here? I think all of us have asked that question at some point or another, like, why am I here? Why do I even exist? Why was I born? Second question, why am I alive? That's an interesting one, and it's different than why am I here? Because many times as we look back on our life, we think, oh my goodness, Lord, your grace is why I'm still alive. I've had times in my life I've looked back and it's like, I don't even know how you protected me, Lord, but thank you so much. So that's a question. Why am I alive? The third question is this: does my life matter? You know, God is such a personal God, but a lot of times I look around and I think, oh my goodness, there's so many people that can do so much. Does my life really matter? If I wasn't here, would it matter? And I'm not going to answer it. I'm tempted to, but I'm going to wait and answer that one. All right, number 4. Does God even see me? You know, life brings us challenges. We go through things and we sometimes ask the question, Lord, do you even see me? Do you see what I am going through? I hope you can relate to that. And I hope it's not just me. But I've had many times in my life where I just think, oh my goodness, do you even see what's going on here? All right. So again, I'm going to resist, the temptation to answer those questions. I think you know the answer. But I want to use a parallel for us today with the life of Hagar. This is such an interesting part in the Bible. Hagar was, of course, the mother of Ishmael. And I was just thinking about her. I like to ponder about some of the things when we see things happen in the Bible, I think that are significant. And when I think about Hagar, I like to put myself in her shoes and just think like, wow, what was she going through? Do you know something really interesting about Hagar? Is that is when they had a discussion in the wilderness, the angel of the Lord, it's the first time that the angel of the Lord appeared in the Bible to actually converse with someone. And so when I see that, I'm like, oh my goodness, there must be something in there that is really important or significant. And we're going to uncover that as we read the passages. But let's just talk about Hagar for a moment and sort of set the stage for answering these 4 questions and really studying the life of Hagar. I was just thinking about how Hagar was the one that was chosen by Sarai to actually carry a child that Sarai thought would be the way for them after 10 years, and they weren't seeing the promise of God come to pass. She decided to kind of take it in her own hands, you might say, and kind of help God a little bit. Have you ever done that? I know I have done that. Help God to bring about the promise that he made in our lives or in her life at this point. So she chose Hagar, her maidservant. And just thinking about that, that is a point at which Sarai had to have a lot of trust in Hagar to be able to have her go into her husband and really believe that her vision of having a child in generations was going to come through this woman. So I want you to think about that. Hagar and Sarai at this point had to have a pretty good relationship for Sarai to trust Hagar to be a wife to Abram and to bear the children that was God's promise to her. Have you ever thought about that? I really didn't think about that until I wrote this book, The Promise of Purpose, and realized that there's so many correlations to Hagar in purpose. As a matter of fact, I really felt like it was a way to start the book. And what we're covering is the introduction to this book with the story of Hagar. But Hagar was probably favored. And I was thinking that if you look around and think about how many servants they may have had, and I don't necessarily know the numbers to that, but she was chosen probably out of a group of many, many servants to be entrusted with this vision. All right, so now let's take a look at what actually happened once Sarai decided and kind of concocted this idea that she was going to have a family through Hagar. I'm going to start in Genesis 16, verse 1. So grab your Bible and read this with me. And actually, I'm in a Spirit-filled Bible. This is one of my favorite Bibles. Gives you a lot of information. And I'm going to start here with verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. All right, now I'm going to verse 2. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Let's stop right there for a moment. All right, remember I was mentioning that sometimes we want to help God along because it appears, since we haven't seen that promise, that he needs some help. I don't think it's a good idea based on this. And actually, this has really helped me to not push forward on some things and try to figure it out, which I tend to do. But she said that the Lord had restrained her from bearing children. That's significant because what she's saying is that God decided basically to not follow through with the promise he gave us. And you know, I don't believe that's true. I don't believe it was God who was restraining the promise of a son in this situation. But that's sometimes how we think, is we can think, well, if I'm not seeing what God promised me, there must be something wrong. God must want to do something different. It's really a temptation that we have when things aren't in the timing that you and I expect. And I would agree. I mean, if I was in her situation and it was 10 years and I hadn't seen the promise, I would definitely be asking some questions. But when we assume that God is restraining that promise from coming to pass, and then we take it in our own hands to do something that we feel would bring it to pass, like, well, maybe God wants to do this. I think that's where we get into dangerous territory and we start to step outside of God's best and his timing for our life. Okay, so let's pick it up from there. It says, then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. Verse 4, so he went into Hagar and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. This is really significant as well. So when we kind of recap the story here of what happened, Sarai chose Hagar to be the maidservant to bring or to carry the promise that God had given her in Abram for a son, for children. I would guess or think that Hagar at that point was highly favored, and maybe even other maidservants in the camp would have been a little jealous. Like, why did they choose Hagar? So my expectation here, and again, I'm just sort of thinking about this, and I don't know for sure. We'll know more when we get to heaven, of course, and find out more about this story. But I was thinking that Hagar was probably feeling pretty good about the fact that she was chosen among all the maidservants to bear the promise of the child. So let's back this into an analogy of maybe something that would make more sense to us today. When somebody has a vision, God's given them a vision for something in their life and a promise, which he gives you and he gives me. Sometimes what can happen is we might have an Ishmael. Have you ever said that? I've definitely said that, and I've heard it a lot in the Christian circles where, oh my goodness, I thought this is what I was supposed to do, but it was an Ishmael, or they had an Ishmael. Well, there's real people involved with the Ishmael. So in this situation, Hagar had to be highly favored by Abram and Sarai to have this very important position. But it's so interesting to me that when she actually conceived, which had everything to do with achieving the vision of the descendants, Hagar became like bitter. She became like she despised. That's what the word of God says. She despised Sarai. So going in, once the promise actually happened, or once what they were hoping would happen actually came about, she probably felt like, wow, I'm being used. Or she probably felt like, you know what? If it wasn't for me, this vision wouldn't come to pass. This promise wouldn't come to pass. And something happened in her that she really resented Sarai for being put in that position. Now, again, I'm sure there's a lot we're going to learn about this when we go to heaven. I'm so excited to hear about it. But there's some important things as we go into this teaching and into these scriptures and put ourselves sort of in Hagar's shoes, you might say. There was some response that she had in this situation that could have actually had something to do with her, the outcome of her going into the wilderness. And I was looking back on my life, and I've been on both sides of a situation like this. I've been in a position where somebody had a vision, whether it's a company, whether it's a ministry. There was someone that had a vision or a purpose for their life that I was on board with to help bring that vision to pass. And here's what can happen. Sometimes when we're a key person in that situation, we can end up becoming resentful, sort of like what happened here with Hagar. And I look back on my life and I realized there were times, especially when I was really, really young, that I actually followed through with something very similar to what's being described here. So let me tell you a story about this. I'm sort of telling on myself, and I'm very open, and just know like this is when I was really young. But when I was 25, actually, that is young, I was managing the largest branch of a bank. And it was about the size of about $100 million. And it was much larger than any other branch, but it was something that I believe God put me in that position, and I was doing a really good job. But the problem was, in my immaturity, I started to think that it was all me, right? And I started to kind of resent my boss at the time because we were bringing a lot of results and she was receiving all the credit. See how I told you I'm telling on myself? All right, so don't look so sweet out there. I know you've had some situations like this too. But anyway, it was really interesting because I started to take on this offense or this resentment, like, well, she's looking so good, but it's me doing all the work. I think that is what was happening here with Hagar. So if I kind of fast forward into the situation with me at the bank and in that work situation, I really had become to a point where I was sort of haughty and I was lacking humility. There's a lot of things that can come into play when we decide that we are the ones that are making something happen, or we are the ones that are bringing success. And because I was so immature, I got to a point where I actually looked for another job. I got another job. I remember going into a meeting and I had an attitude. Do you know what I mean by that? Sort of like an edge or an attitude in this meeting. I was still entrusted to go in this meeting with people that were looking at working with us. But in that meeting, because I had carried this attitude or this resentment towards my boss, I was really difficult in there and very, very critical. And I remember leaving that meeting, really not thinking anything about it because I was in this mindset, right, that I've just described. And my boss came to me and she said, you know what, Karen? She said, in that meeting, I was actually really embarrassed that you were on my team. That hit me like a ton of bricks. And she said that I brought you in that meeting to be able to help us to think through where we could go going forward. But because you were so critical, they really looked and thought, why is this person on the team? I'll tell you what, that was stunning to me. And I had to really look back and say, what in the world happened? And I realized it was a situation like this. I was definitely helping a vision become reality, or a promise of a purpose, or a promise from God, or a promise in business coming to reality. But instead of me functioning in my role that was in the hierarchy of the organization with humility, okay, I didn't give God the credit or have an understanding that the reason I could bring results was because of God. I thought it was about me. And when we're in that position, we can be really subject to deception, and we can be subject to going down a path that is not necessarily a direction that you and I want to go. It says in verse 5, then Sarai said to Abram, my wrong be upon you. Uh-oh. I think she was blaming Abram for her decision. Have you ever done that? I have, but we don't have enough time to go through that story, so let's keep going. All right. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judged between you and me. All right, let's go on. Verse 6. So Abram said to Sarai, indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please. And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. Now, I studied this out a little bit, and when she said she dealt harshly with her, she dealt harshly with her. And to the point where Hagar, knowing that she was pregnant, fled, and she wanted to go back to Egypt where she had come from. And you know, that's a temptation that we face, kind of in this pursuit of promise, laying the stage or the foundation for what we're going to be talking about. There are going to be times in your life, I just want to let you know, as you pursue your purpose, that you're going to feel like you want to give up and head back home. I definitely went through that, and I'll be sharing that in later episodes. But this is a temptation that we all have, and I believe this is very purposeful for us to pay attention to, Because when we step out into doing the purpose that we believe God has called us to, when it's not comfortable, we either think we miss God or we think like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm headed back to where I came from. All right, let's go on to verse 7. Now the angel of the Lord, I love this, and that is Jesus, the angel of the Lord, found her by the spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. So the angel of the Lord found her. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from and where are you going? That's very interesting because the angel of the Lord, Jesus, is God, right? All-knowing. I have a pretty good feeling that he knew where she came from. So that means that there was a purpose in her answering this question, which I'm going to be sharing with you yet today. All right, so he goes on to say, or she said in this situation, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. So she said it. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Well, that doesn't sound very fun. Sarai had mistreated her. She was, offended, resentful, going back home. And what, God, do you want me to return back to that situation? A lot of times when we leave a situation and haven't fulfilled our purpose or a reason for being there, God will tell us like, go back and finish this up. All right, let's continue. In verse 10, then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly so that they shall not be counted for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. So even with this, she ran away from the place that the Lord is telling her to go back to. But in that, the Lord is saying, I heard your affliction. I love that, because when things get tough and we want to just run, God is right there saying, I see where you're at. I know this is difficult. He didn't judge her. He didn't tell her to, pull her big boy pants up or whatever. He said, I see your affliction. To me, that's just so tender and loving from the Lord. He goes on to tell her about Ishmael and what she can expect. And in verse 13, he says, then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. She had a revelation and an understanding that God saw her, that she was important, that she was someone that God cared about. Do you know, that is so beautiful. And I think that's a word for some of us, many of us, in our times of difficulty or in our times where we feel like nobody sees us. God is saying, I see you. Isn't that beautiful? And then it goes on here. It says, you are the God who sees me, or who sees, for she said, have I also here seen him who sees me? So she was recognizing like, wow, am I seeing God? Have you ever had that in your life? Like, wow, is this you, Lord? Whether it's through a word he speaks to you or just the presence or just something beautiful that happens, something that comes your way. And it's like, wow, Lord, you mean you actually see me? That's what Hagar was going through right here. And then in verse 15, it says, so Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, who Hagar bore, Ishmael, because she told him that the Lord, the angel of the Lord, told them to name the boy Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him, which is amazing, but that's a whole nother story. All right, so in this, I want to encourage you. God sees us in our place of hurt, confusion, and even doubt. He lovingly finds us there, and he speaks to our destiny and to our purpose. See, that is really key. In our time of hurt, in our time of difficulty, what is bringing us out from that? Of course, knowing that he loves us, but also reminding us that we have a purpose and a destiny. What gets you up in the morning? Like, what causes you to go throughout your day and be excited about it? I know for me, I am totally energized when I am working within my purpose. And in my book, The Promise of Purpose, I describe to you very openly a time where I got an amazing promotion. I got an increase. It was written up in the newspaper. I was feeling really good about where I was going. But the problem was I was going to that position for the wrong reason. It was not in line with my purpose. So when I got to the point of being so miserable that I could hardly stand it, I didn't understand what was going on. And it was very challenging, but it was the place that I could actually catapult from into my future and my destiny of that sort of aha moment, like, wow, I need to have purpose in my life. All right, we are already out of time today, and I didn't even get to the 4 points that I mentioned at the beginning of the program. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to, watch tomorrow in the next episode, I'm going to cover those 4 points, and it's going to make a lot of sense of the life of Hagar. And I think you're going to find a lot of parallels as you're pursuing things. You know, we have a heart for God, or you wouldn't be watching this program. But sometimes what we define as success is what the world is telling us is success. And in this situation, like with the life of Hagar, where she was very favored, when the reality of actually conceiving Abram's son, when she actually realized the weight of that, she began to despise Sarai. Okay? There's something in there. So she had to have somewhat of an adjustment, but also God had to speak vision and purpose to her life, which you are going to find out more about tomorrow. So I want to remind you that I've got The Promise of Purpose is the brand new book coming out. And remember, I've got a special package for you that includes the book. It includes the journal. And then I've got a little bookmark. I've got an activation card or an encouragement card that goes with it. And also, I invite you to join our private Facebook group that is the Promise of Purpose community. We need to join together in this journey, and I have loved so much to have the opportunity to actually get to know a lot of you, and I really want you to become part of that. And you can do that by going to KarenConrad.net, go to promiseofpurpose.com, order the book, and I'm looking forward to continuing on this journey with you on the Promise of Purpose.